Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be looking at adding single sign-on to your Mac environment through Intune. We're going to be starting by looking at how to add single sign-on to your enterprise apps through a plugin, and then we're going to end with adding single sign-on to the whole platform of your Mac environment so that you can actually log in with your identity and then have everything set up from there on. So without further ado, let's get into this one. Defensive insights within a compressed format. So we're in our Microsoft tenant in Intune, and we're looking at configuration profiles under the macOS environment. And the document that we're going to be following, which I'll link in the description, is this one by Microsoft. It says use the Microsoft Enterprise Single Sign-On plugin on macOS devices. Now, the Enterprise Single Sign-On plugin is not respecting the login of the Mac user, but passing through that single sign-on Microsoft Authentication library over to all the enterprise apps, and you can pass it to your Microsoft apps, you can pass it to your Apple apps. And we're going to be looking at the recommendations out of the box here in this tutorial. So if we scroll all the way down, we're going to look here where it gives us our step-by-step guide, where it's going to ask us to create a configuration profile for macOS under the templates and then select device features. So we go ahead and do that. New policy, templates, device features, and then click create. Now we want to have a good name. So we'll try to use our emojis. We're going to use a key to represent single sign-on. And this is going to be our enterprise plugin. This is for the macOS environment. Now the area that we're looking at is single sign-on app extension. And you can see that if we go back to this document here, scroll down, you can see they choose that. And then they select Microsoft Entra ID. So we're going to go ahead and just follow that. Now the first area that we have here is app bundle IDs. And if we hover over here, this is the additional app IDs of the apps you would like to use for the Microsoft Entra single sign-on extension. It gives you additional app permissions to use single sign-on, and it goes on. So if we want to single out an app that we want to pass single sign-on to, we can do it here. But we can also use the additional configuration here and follow the guide to add almost like a wildcard. So app prefix allow list, we want to allow anything following this guide. We want to allow anything from Microsoft and anything from Apple. So we'll copy that name as the key. I'm going to paste it in as the key here. The type is string, and we are going to copy these here. Now it's at this point that I would say if in your environment you're trying to lock things down to be expressly Microsoft only, and even for your BYOD Mac, you wanted them to be using Microsoft managed apps, then you wouldn't use the com.apple here, as you'd want to be passing only to Microsoft things and applications. And we'll go into our express blocking in a minute. So next is browser single sign-on interaction enabled. We want to enable this. And this is an integer, and you set it to 1 to enable it. And last is disable its explicit app prompt. So here it says some apps might incorrectly enforce end user prompts at the protocol layer. If you see this problem, users are prompted to sign in, even though the Microsoft Enterprise single sign-on plugin works for other apps. So we're just going to set that anyway because it's recommended, and we can just assume that there's going to be something that might come up and we'll prevent it. So with just that, you can go ahead and apply this and it'll work. And that's fine. You apply it to your users, they'll pick it up, and you'll have single sign-on pushed. So that's beautiful. But if we scroll down here, we have this little tip here from Microsoft to say, hey, there's other properties that we can go ahead and configure. So I've opened up that tab. Again, I'll put this link in the description. And if we start to scroll down a little bit further, we get these other options. Here we go. Enable single sign-on for all apps with a specific bundle ID prefix. And then this one was the one that I think has a use case that I can think of, and that is disabling single sign-on for specific apps. So I've been in environments where a tenant wants the design of using Microsoft Edge because first party is going to have more control than the third party. And so you may want to have your users only using Microsoft Edge for their browser and for anything that is including work environment. So a good way of doing that may be potentially to block single sign-on with its ability for Safari. So to funnel users towards using a particular browser, you can have this set up to have an app block list, block Safari, and say, hey, if you want single sign-on, you want all that goodness, then go and use the first-party browser, which is being pushed to your device through Intune. And we've got it set up with the right security controls. Even if you want to do app protection around what data can leave and then data loss prevention, then you can do it this way. So worth being said, worth knowing that you have those extra areas, and be sure to go look through them and apply what is needed in your environment. So we're going to go ahead and just leave the recommendations, click next. We're going to apply it to all our users, click next, and create. So when that gets picked up, the Mac will now have single sign-on pushed for that user identity, so that when they go and interact with anything, it's going to pick that up and authenticate through that. And now that's assuming that the device is already Intune joined. And if you haven't seen that, go back and watch my prior video about provisioning a Mac through the company portal. But now we're going to look at a different thing, and I think that this one's more beautiful than the last, and that's platform single sign-on for a macOS environment. So in our Windows environment, we'd be pretty used to having to sign in with our user identity, and that gives us the auth that then passes on to single sign-on, so that any other thing that goes from there has the authentication and will sign in with the user device being already signed in and already authenticated. So that is what we're trying to do now with platform single sign-on for Mac OS. So before we do anything, I'm going to actually unassign the configuration profile that we set, because they will combat against each other. You got to have one or the other. And so this has recently changed. The platform single sign-on may be something that you may have set up in the past, and it's worth knowing that it has changed slightly and some things have been depreciated. And so even the documentation from Microsoft is missing a few areas. So we're going to close these tabs and go to this document that I will share again in the description, which is configure platform single sign-on for Mac OS devices in Microsoft Intune. We're going to scroll down and get straight to the guts of it. So we're going to go and create a policy. So we'll go ahead and create our policy. So we're going to click new policy. The profile type is going to be settings catalog instead of templates this time. Click create. For our name, we always want to use emojis. So emojis are fun. We want to give it a name that is going to make sense when we go and audit things. So we're going to call this platform single sign-on for Mac OS. Then we're going to click add settings, and the area that the guide requires us to have a look at and to change is under authentication. So we're going to open up authentication, and then we have this area called extensible single sign-on. So we click that, and we don't actually have to add everything. So what we need to add for the start is platform single sign-on. That's going to add the extension identifier. Then we add registration token, screen lockout behavior, team identifier, and URLs. And we close that pane. Now this is all going to be a little bit jumbled compared to what is in the guide. But if we have a look for what we need, so in this case, the first thing is URLs. It's going to be the last thing here. And we can go ahead and add those URLs that Microsoft is pointing to. And these are the URLs that the request is going to be redirected to authenticate. Then we're going to look for our team identifier, which is just here. Screen lockout behavior, we don't have a choice. There is only one choice here. Our registration token is going to be this field here. Extension identifier is going to be this part here. The ID for the single sign-on. Now the account display name is all around the notification side of things. So when the handshake's made, what display name do you want here? So I'm going to go off what I had before, which was platform single sign-on or macOS. So we're going to see in a minute when we push this to the device, we'll get a notification in the top right-hand side that's going to have the heading of SSO macOS. And that's what it's referring to. Now, depending on how you set this up, you may want to have your authentication tied to something else other than groups, but we're going to be pointing it to groups because I believe that's the best way to do security, is not on a granular user nature, but on a group setting nature. So you have your delegated groups, so your low privileged users and your privileged users, and then you add the users to that because it becomes easier for auditing if you ever need to do that down the track. So our additional groups here is our unprivileged users. So we're going to just call them user accounts. And our administrator group is going to call it something pretty easy. So admin accounts. We're going to leave our authentication grace period to the default. And then under authentication method, we're going to be using the user secure enclave key. Now, note if you use password, which is not recommended by the guide, by Microsoft, is by nature less secure. But if you do use password, you're going to have to add a few more areas in that I haven't included, and that's around the profiles for the user lockout and the there's a few other areas. So be sure to read the guide if you need to use password. But in this case, we're going to use the user secure enclave key. And if you had smart cards, I would recommend go up to smart card, as that's going to be an even better, more secure approach towards this. Authorization groups we're not going to need, so we're going to remove that. We're going to enable authorization, and we're going to enable user create user at login. So these are the areas in which password would be needed. So file vault policy, we're not going to need that because we're not using password. We'll leave our login frequency as default. Login policy we can remove, we're not using password. And then the new user authorization mode, we're going to point to groups. So every time a new user authorizes, we need it to be pointing to the group for that handshake and for that permission level. Non-platform single sign-on accounts. So if you had a local account existing on the Mac and you don't want it to authorize against single sign-on, You can put the full username here and it'll pick that up and won't push the authorization prompt to that user. So we're going to remove that. Offline grace period, we'll leave that as a default. And we'll scroll past this for the moment just to say that the unlock policy is also one that needs to be set up if you're using password. So in this case, we're not. We're going to remove that. So going back to token to user mapping, this is going to be what maps the authorization on the device to the user in single sign-on world. So account name, we'll go back to our guide here. And we're going to be using this field, so preferred username. And then for full name, it is just lowercase name. I'm going to use shared device keys. I believe this is tied to the ability to have a shared device where multiple users can log in to. So you can have that one same encryption key for all the users. Be sure to go check that for yourself. And if it is a device where you have one user signing in and that's it, maybe go and question whether or not you need to use this. But for our use case, we're going to set that to enabled. And then last, we're going to set our user authorization mode to our groups. So again, we're pointing to our groups for our authorization, which we set up earlier. And sorry, not last, but now last, our type we need to set to redirect. So that's going to redirect to those URLs that we set at the beginning. And this is following with what the type is here in this document. So now we've got it set up. So now we click next. We're going to add scope tags if we need it. So in this case, I'm just going to leave them as default. Click next again. And we're going to apply it against all of our users. Then we can see the review and create, and we're going to create this. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the device. In this case, it's the one that I'm actually on. And I'm going to push it to sync. So we're going to click sync here. And another way of doing this is by opening up our company portal, which is going to force a authorization. So now we can see that the registration required pop-up has come up, and we see that that name that we allocated earlier is here for the platform single sign-on for macOS and the option to register. So we're going to click register. That's going to prompt us for our password, and then it's going to take us through this stage of registering our device with Microsoft Entra. So we want to make sure that we use the user in which we want to log in as. So in this case, I'm using my unprivileged user. While I'm authenticating, I want to make sure that you know of one area that's going to be key to this authentication process actually working. And that's whether or not your user has the ability to join a device to Microsoft Entra. And it's a rule that's sort of buried away in Entra. So go to your Entra admin center, open up the devices pane, go to all devices and then device settings, and you're going to see this area here about users may join devices to Microsoft Entra. In any other setting, I would say set this to your system admins and to the system admin group. But in this case, because you're going to have a user context driven adoption where you want them to sign in to authenticate it, just add that user at that time, get them to complete that process, and then remove them. In an environment where you have high security, what you would do is actually take hold of that device, do this whole process with your system admins, and then pass back the device for them to log in since it's already joined. If it's BYOD, you're going to have a look at this setting as it's going to directly affect them. And if they're not added to this allow list here, it will fail and won't register, and will say something along the lines of your administrator does not give you access to do this. So I thought I'd just add that in there as a tip to make sure that you go and check in your Entra portal under devices, all devices, and then your device settings and the users that may enroll devices to Entra, that you select the person that's doing it. So after you've authenticated, you're going to see something like this pop up, and it's going to prompt you to open the system settings to allow company portal password options. So the place to find this in case that pop-up doesn't come up is under your system settings. Once that opens, you're going to scroll down until you find passwords. Then you're going to authenticate, then password options. And here is where you're going to enable company portal. Once that is all done, your password single sign-on will be set up. And a way to check that is to go to your users and groups. And then under users and groups, you should see the new groups that have been added for platform single sign-on that we created for our admin accounts and our user accounts. And then in this case, I have a username that is the same as my unprivileged user username, and I authenticated through this user. And so this should mean that if I click I on this user account and I scroll down, I can see tokens for single sign-on tokens are present and they are authenticated. So now our single sign-on for platform is set up. If in the case you wanted to log in as another user, you would simply click the Apple icon at the top left, log out, and then hover over the circle for the current logged in user. That'll pop out to another option for other users. Click the other users and then sign in with the Entra credentials that you would usually sign in with. So your full email and password, and that's going to go and create a new local user that's then assigned. So to test our theory, to test that single sign-on is in fact working, we're going to try and navigate to something that would usually prompt authentication. So if we open up Microsoft Edge, and we will do this in Safari to prove the point that single sign-on is working, but first case, let's use something that's Microsoft. So we'll open up our Edge browser, and we're going to try and navigate to myapps.microsoft.com. So we can see straight away the authentication is being processed without any passwords being put in, and we're logged in. Now to prove the point further, if we open up Safari, so if we go to the same location, myapps.microsoft.com, we attempt to log in, we can see we've logged in. We put no authentication in, and that has signed us in. So we can see now that single sign-on is working and is using our unprivileged user as the account to log it in. So now we've done it. We've covered our single sign-on for an enterprise plugin. We've also covered platform single sign-on so that you can sign in using your Entra ID and then have single sign-on experience across all the apps that need that identity to be pushed. So I implore you that in your environment, if you have and you are managing Mac devices, even if they are BYOD, go and deploy this. It's going to be a great security measure having single sign-on set up, and it's going to make your users like the experience more when interacting with Microsoft on a non-Microsoft system. Please let me know if this video has been helpful and that you have found any information that you may have not been able to find elsewhere, and give me a comment on what you would like to be in another video where we can go in depth on how to set something else up. So thanks so much for watching. See you next time.